I sent my parents $550 weekly, then my dad said my son didn't count, so I shut everything down overnight and that silence turned their lives upside down. You'd think after everything I did for them, everything I sacrificed, they'd have some respect, or even just basic human decency. But no, my parents treated me like an extension of their problems. Like my only role in life was to make theirs easier. They saw my kindness as weakness. And for too long, I let them. I'm Barbara. I'm 34. And I'm finally telling this story because for years, I let them guilt me into silence. I kept hoping if I just did a little more, gave a little more, they'd finally change. But they didn't. And now I'm the one who changed. I hope someone out there hears this and understands what it means to reach your breaking point. It started 3 years ago when I began sending the money every single week. $550 like clockwork. They always had a reason. Dad's blood pressure meds. The rent was going up. The car broke down. Mom needed new glasses. They never once said, "Thank you." They just acted like it was expected, like it was mine and Rachel's job to keep them afloat. Rachel's my younger sister. She's always been their favorite. Blonde, perfect teeth. Did pageants as a kid. They'd brag about her job, her boyfriend, her haircut. I was just the responsible one. The one who handled their bills, made the calls, drove them to appointments, sent money. They never asked Rachel for a dime, but she sided with me when things started getting worse. Even she saw it. My husband Tyler used to ask why I did it, why I let them treat me that way. I didn't have an answer. I just couldn't imagine cutting them off. No matter how cold they were to us, especially to our son, they never bonded with him. They never babysat, barely acknowledged his birthdays. Mom once said she didn't feel connected to him because he looked too much like Tyler. So I tried. I sent photos, invited them over, included them in everything. Last weekend was his 3rd birthday. We planned a small backyard party, nothing extravagant, but he was excited for weeks. He picked out a cake shaped like a bulldozer and kept talking about how Grandma and Grandpa were coming. We even printed a little sign that said, "Welcome family." They never came. I waited until after the candles were blown out, after the guests left, after my son fell asleep with cake on his shirt and one shoe on. Then I called them. Dad picked up. I didn't even ask why they didn't show. I just said, "We were waiting for you." He said, "We don't count your family." Then hung up. I sat there holding the phone, not feeling sadness or anger, just this eerie calm, like something had shifted inside me. I opened my laptop and shut everything down. Every bill in my name gone. I canceled the utilities, disconnected the grocery card, closed the bank account they used. I called their landlord and gave him their number, told him not to contact me again. 40 minutes later, Mom started calling like a maniac. She left 7 voicemails in 10 minutes. She called me selfish. Said I was destroying them, said I owed them, that they were my blood. She tried calling Rachel. Then Tyler, then showed up at my grandmother's house screaming so loud the neighbors came outside. But Grandma already knew. I told her what happened that night and for the first time she didn't try to defend them. When Mom started ranting in the driveway, Grandma walked outside calm as ever. And then with the kind of slap that ends generations of denial, she shut her up. She said, "How dare you treat your daughter like that? You're lucky she gave you anything at all. And now it's over." I watched it all happen from the car. My son was in the back seat asleep with a little plastic truck still in his hand, and that was the moment I realized I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the mother now. And I was going to protect him from the people who never protected me. After the slap, everything went quiet for a few days. No calls, no texts, just this eerie silence like they were regrouping, planning their next move. I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. I knew my mother. Silence was just the eye of her storm. Rachel checked in every morning. She kept asking if I was okay, if I was sure about what I did. I told her I was more than sure. I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly checking my phone or calculating how much money I had left after taking care of their bills. The silence broke on Thursday morning. My work email pinged and there it was, a forwarded message from our joint cell phone provider. Apparently, they tried upgrading their phones on my account. Both of them maxed out models. I'd already shut the account down days earlier. I replied to the email just to be sure and got confirmation. The attempt had been blocked, but still the nerve. That same day, Tyler found a letter wedged into our mailbox. It wasn't stamped. Someone had driven to our house to leave it. My name was on the front, written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You can ignore us, but don't forget, family is blood, and your little boy has our blood, too." That was the line. That was the moment revenge became something more than emotional. I took a photo of the letter and drove straight to Grandma's. She read it twice, sat down, and told me to stay calm. Then she said something that caught me off guard. It's time they learn what survival looks like without you. She pulled out a small notepad where she'd written down every major expense I'd covered over the last 3 years. She'd been keeping track. Rent, utilities, medical bills, phone plans, groceries, car repairs, even a few Amazon purchases. I couldn't believe it. She said, "We're not going to hurt them. We're going to show them." I started small. I called their dentist's office and had my name removed from the file. Same with the pharmacy. Then I emailed their landlord again and asked for a copy of their lease. I just wanted to see it, see what kind of mess they were in. They hadn't paid rent that month. The next day, my mom called me from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. Then Rachel texted. They just showed up at my work. I called her immediately. Mom and Dad had walked into Rachel's office like everything was normal. Asked her for $300 to get through the week. Rachel told them no. She said, "If you want money, ask the daughter you actually respect." Dad lost it, started raising his voice. Said she'd always been a disappointment. That night, Rachel came over with a bottle of wine and something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Distance. They don't care about any of us. They only care about what they can get. I nodded. She leaned in and said, "So, what's next?" And that's when I told her about the account, the one they didn't know I had. Back when I was still handling everything, paying their rent, their bills, refilling their prescriptions, I set up a side account. It was supposed to be a safety net for emergencies. My name only, no one else knew it existed except Tyler and Grandma. What they didn't know was that every time I sent them $550, I added $100 more into that side account quietly every week. By the time I cut them off, there was a little over $15,000 sitting there. I told Rachel about it that night after she'd had 2 glasses of wine and was still reeling from what our dad said to her. Her face went blank when I mentioned the account. Then she asked the same thing Tyler did when I first started it. "Why didn't you use it for yourself?" "Because I wasn't ready to walk away back then. I thought maybe I'd need it for them. But now I had a different use in mind. The first thing I did was hire a process server. Quietly, I pulled every receipt, every transfer, every documented expense I'd covered. Grandma co-signed a statement detailing how long I'd been financially supporting them. It wasn't about suing them. I didn't want their money. It was about establishing a clear record of how much I gave before they started spreading lies. Because I knew my parents the moment they realized the free ride was truly over, they'd get loud. They'd start telling people I abandoned them, that I never helped, that I was a cold daughter poisoned by my husband. I was going to cut that story off before it started. 2 days later, they were officially served. Not with a lawsuit, just a formal notice that all financial ties had been severed and that any further attempts to use my name for credit or bills would be considered fraud. Rachel told me they freaked out. My dad screamed at the mailman. My mom sat in the driveway chain smoking for hours. Then came the text, just one sentence from my mother. "I hope your son never treats you the way you treated us." It didn't hurt. Not anymore. What did shake me was what came next. Grandma called in the middle of the night. She said someone had broken into her shed. Nothing major stolen, just the lock broken and some things thrown around. The only thing missing, a box of my old school stuff she had kept. Report cards, baby pictures, letters I wrote as a kid. We both knew exactly who had done it. I didn't sleep that night. Tyler sat with me in the living room while I went through every security camera we had. I checked my son's room 3 times. I couldn't explain it, but something in me flipped. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were trying to get to me through my past, through my child. So, I started phase 2. If they wanted to dig into my life, fine. But they were going to find something else. Something that would blow back right in their faces. And I knew exactly where to start. I called the one person they thought they had wrapped around their finger. Uncle Dan. Uncle Dan was my dad's younger brother. Grew up in his shadow, always getting blamed for everything that went wrong in the family. He moved out of state years ago after a huge falling out none of us really understood. All I knew was that my parents hated him. Talked about him like he was a drunk loser who never amounted to anything. But I remembered something. One night when I was 16, I overheard a late night call between Mom and Grandma. Grandma was furious. She said, "You and Alan stole what was never yours, and Dan has every right to be angry." At the time, I thought it was just about inheritance drama or something petty. But now that they were escalating, now that they were sending threats and breaking into sheds, I wanted answers. I wanted leverage. So, I called Uncle Dan, told him everything about the money, about the birthday, about the letter, the slap, the break-in. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for this day for 20 years. I asked what he meant, and what he told me turned everything upside down. Apparently, when their parents passed, my grandparents on my dad's side, there was an inheritance left for all 3 sons. Except there was a catch: my grandparents didn't trust my father with money. Not because he was irresponsible, because he was manipulative. So they wrote up a will that divided the estate 3 ways, but with one condition. Barbara's portion will go to her directly when she turns 30. Barbara, me. My grandparents left me money, not my parents, not Uncle Dan, me. Uncle Dan had a copy of the original will, but when my dad got to the lawyer first, he claimed I didn't want anything to do with it. That I declined it. I was 17. I didn't even know they died until 2 weeks after the funeral. Uncle Dan said he suspected something, but back then he had no proof and no money to fight it. He offered to send me everything. Documents, emails, even a letter my grandmother wrote me that was never delivered. I gave him my address. 3 days later, a package arrived. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 12 years ago. If you're reading this, it means you finally saw through the lies. You were always meant for better things. Don't let them take that from you. I felt sick. I sat on the kitchen floor reading it again and again. Tyler didn't say a word. He just sat next to me. I called Rachel. She came over that night. Read the letter. Read the will. She didn't say much either. Just whispered, "They're monsters." But that wasn't even the worst of it. The next morning, Rachel called me panicked, said she got an anonymous email with an attachment, a folder of old pictures. Someone had taken photos of her house, her front door, her car, her bedroom window. The email just said, "Pick a side fast." She called the cops immediately. They said without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. But now we knew it wasn't just about guilt anymore, it was intimidation. They were trying to scare us back into submission. And maybe that would have worked once, but now I had a copy of the will. I had the original letter. I had Uncle Dan. I had Rachel. I had Grandma. And they had nothing. So I went to a lawyer and I told him everything. The lawyer was calm but blunt. He said, "If what you're showing me holds up, this is going to get ugly for them fast." He reviewed the documents from Uncle Dan, the letter from my grandmother, and the paper trail of financial abuse I'd quietly compiled over the years. Then he pulled something up on his screen and turned it toward me. "There's a trust in your name, still active." My heart dropped. I didn't know what to say. The trust was real. Established by my grandparents with a provision that no funds could be accessed until I turned 30. The same year, I started sending my parents money every week. They had spent 3 years draining their daughter's bank account while secretly sitting on mine. The worst part, they'd forged my signature 3 times to withdraw small amounts for emergencies. $2,000 here. $1,500 there. The lawyer said we could press charges, that this went far beyond family drama. This was theft, fraud. I didn't give him an answer. Not yet. That night, Rachel came over again. She was visibly shaken. She had just gotten off the phone with Mom. Apparently, Dad had a breakdown. Screaming in the house, punching the cabinets. Said he was tired of being disrespected. Tired of being cut off like trash. Mom told Rachel to convince me to call off the lawyer. Said I was destroying the family for money that was never mine anyway. That phrase stuck with me. Never mine anyway. It was like a window into how they really saw me. The tool, a resource, not a person. Rachel, for once, didn't play neutral. She told Mom if they contacted her again, she'd block them. She'd already filed a report about the creepy photos. Then she told me something unexpected. "Remember that silver bracelet Mom always wore?" I nodded. It was supposedly a family heirloom from her great-grandmother. Rachel laughed bitterly. "He pawned it last month for $80. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was, because that was her pattern. Building things up with fake sentiment, then selling them for quick cash the second they became inconvenient. 2 days later, everything cracked open. Grandma called. She said my parents were officially evicted. No rent paid for 2 months. My name was no longer on anything and they hadn't figured out how to survive without me. They tried begging the landlord to let them stay. Said their daughter had abandoned them, that she had money and was hiding it out of spite. He wasn't interested. That same evening, Tyler noticed someone parked across from our house. An old blue sedan, engine running, just sitting there. He stepped outside. The car sped off. We called the police and gave them everything. The photos Rachel received, the break-in at Grandma's, the forged trust withdrawals, the harassment. They opened a case. Then the next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. "You don't get to win." But that's the thing. I wasn't trying to win. I was just done losing. The final call came on a Tuesday. Not from my mother, not from my father, from the sheriff's department. They'd been picked up after trying to use my old ID at a check cashing place. The clerk recognized my name and flagged it. When the cops searched them, they found a folder with Rachel's address and several photos inside. They weren't just spiraling. They were planning something. The officer said I should consider filing a restraining order. I didn't hesitate. I filed one for myself and one for my son. Rachel did the same the next morning. That was it. That was the line they crossed with no way back. For the first time since this whole harrowing ordeal had begun, a profound sense of peace finally washed over me. It was as if the heavy weight I'd carried for years had suddenly lifted, leaving room for something lighter, hope, perhaps, or simply the quiet joy of a life no longer dictated by obligation. Grandma, ever the pillar of strength in our family, decided that this milestone deserved recognition. She invited all of us over that weekend, right after the restraining order had been officially signed and sealed by the court. It was me, Tyler, Rachel, and my little boy, a small, chosen family gathering in her cozy home. She went all out in her own understated way, preparing a hearty pot roast that filled the house with comforting aromas, the kind that remind you of simpler times. She even dusted off her old pearls, wearing them with a quiet pride, as if to say this was a moment worth dressing up for. I feel like celebrating, she announced with a warm smile, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in ages. The evening was filled with easy conversation, laughter that didn't feel forced, and the simple pleasure of being together without any underlying tension. At one point during the meal, Grandma gently pulled me aside into her living room, away from the clatter of dishes and my son's excited chatter. She pressed a small box into my hands, her fingers lingering on mine for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't wrapped extravagantly, just plain and simple, much like her. Inside lay a locket, nothing costly or ostentatious, but beautifully meaningful in its modesty. When I carefully opened it, my breath caught. There was a faded photo of me as a chubby toddler, all wide eyes and innocent grin, nestled beside a recent snapshot of my son from that very birthday party, the one that had sparked everything. She looked at me softly and said, "This is the family that matters." Her words landed deep in my heart, affirming what I'd come to realize on my own. Then, with a mischievous glint in her eye that betrayed her feisty spirit, she added, "You know, I slapped your mother that day because I was angry, furious, really, but if I ever see her again, it won't just be one slap." We both burst into laughter, the kind that releases lingering stress and bonds you even closer. It was cathartic, a shared acknowledgement of the boundaries we'd all finally drawn. In the weeks that followed, life began to feel truly ours again. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Tyler and I dipped into a portion of the trust money, the one my grandparents had safeguarded for me all those years. We didn't go overboard, it was nothing lavish or showy. Instead, we focused on creating something special right in our own backyard, a modest little playhouse, sturdy and inviting, with room for imagination to run wild. My son absolutely adored it from the moment the last nail was hammered in. He dubbed it his work zone, spending hours there with his toy tools, hammering away and building pretend projects just like he'd seen his dad do. Watching him play so freely, obsessed with his little hammers and screwdrivers, filled me with a contentment I hadn't known was possible. Rachel, too, was carving out her own new chapter. She found a cozy apartment just a few miles down the road, not too far for spontaneous visits, but enough space for her to breathe independently. Despite the distance, we'd grown incredibly close, closer than we'd ever been as sisters. Every Friday evening, without fail, she'd come over for dinner, bringing her bright energy and stories from her week. On weekends, she'd volunteer to babysit, giving Tyler and me rare moments to ourselves while she spoiled my son with games and treats. Those routines became our anchor, weaving a tapestry of support and love that felt unbreakable. As for my parents, they seemed to fade into the background, almost like ghosts from a past life. They vanished from our immediate world, no more unexpected calls or dramatic appearances. The last anyone heard, they were crashing with some distant cousin out in the arid desert somewhere, scraping by without a car, steady jobs, or any real stability. Uncle Dan, who had re-entered our lives like an unexpected ally, sent me a photo one day after bumping into them by chance at a rundown gas station. He said they barely registered his presence, didn't even recognize him amid their haze. In the image, they were just two weary, hollow-eyed figures shuffling out of the convenience store, clutching a cheap bag of chips and a six-pack of beer, nothing more. I stared at that photo for a long moment, searching for any flicker of pity or regret. But there was none. Not even a trace. Because what had happened wasn't about revenge, not in the vindictive sense I'd once feared it might become. No, this was something purer, correction. A natural consequence of a lifetime spent torching every bridge in sight until, inevitably, there was no more wood left to burn. In quiet reflection, I finally grasped the wisdom in something Grandma had shared with me years ago, back when I was just 16 and sobbing over yet another brutal argument with my mom. She'd held me then and said, Sometimes the only way to move forward is to let the dead thing stay buried. I'd nodded through tears at the time, not fully understanding. But now, I did. I let it all go, the resentment, the guilt, the endless cycle, and in its place, we built something beautiful. We're happy now, in the most ordinary, profound ways, quiet evenings, normal days, and a freedom that feels earned. They don't count my family anymore. And honestly? Good. Because they're no longer part of it.